Are we sure? Are we sold that we see Usyk Joshua 2?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sitting in that presser
Another way to
yesterday, I don't think there is any shadow of a doubt that it doesn't happen, because Joshua wants it desperately. Hearn wants it. It's contracted. Their feeling on it is that where do they go? Where else could they go? And the fact is, they could go and beat a few. They could have 3 or 4 fights and rebuild. And this is kind of the problem with boxing now, particularly when you're boxing twice a year and you're a star like Joshua. He can't go and have a few. He can't have a rebuild.
Can't go and fight Marius Vac, can he?
Do it. Like he can't do it. You can't go and box. You can't go and. I saw someone tweet that when Muhammad Ali lost to Joe Frazier, he went and had something like 14 or 15 fights before he beat him in the rematch. Joshua can't do that. He has to jump in. He has to jump into this fight now and do it again and hope for the best, much like he did against Ruiz. Because if he wasn't going to do it against Ruiz, he ain't going to do it now. And I feel like it happens instantly. Yeah. Eddie even said February. I believe it'll. I mean, Saudi, I'm sure will stump up enough money. My feeling is that it will be in Saudi.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Sort of first third of next year, maybe.
Yeah.
You can't really do it in England unless you go to Cardiff, which I don't think they would. I mean, it's far too big for the O2. So I think it's a Saudi job. And I just don't know how he wins.
And do you think you if you do it in the UK anyway, I agree with you, I think it goes to Saudi. But if you do it in the UK anyway, is there any problem? Is there a problem now getting 60, 70,000 in there? We've seen Joshua get knocked out. We've seen him lose comprehensively to Alexander Usyk.
I think there probably is, because with sports fans, as we know, boxing's got a niche following week in, week out, and then these big fights could pull in a huge floating audience. But just from people I know myself, like friends of mine who are sports fans and like watching a big fight, I'm pretty confident that what they'll say to me now is, he's been beat twice now.
Yeah.
That's what they'll say, and they won't be that interested in the rematch. So I'm not sure they could. I think it'd be a lot more difficult to sell the rematch. It's just that. It's that simple, really.
I think Cardiff's a problem as well, because a lot of people went to Cardiff for the Parker and then the Takam fight. It's basically a nightmare. There's not enough hotels, not enough taxis.
No, it's horrible.
There's probably not enough fuel now, to be honest. But there's a lot of people went, okay, I'm not doing Cardiff again. So like that, what did they get in total there? 130,000 people or whatever over the course of those 2 fights. I think it's too big for the O2 though. I do think like it generates more money at the gate than the O2 would offer. So for me, it's Saudi. Eddie said last night he said he's already had messages from people going, we want the rematch. So you have to think that's probably Saudi.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're not stumping up 200 million quid for it, but it's probably going to represent the most lucrative of the options. Joshua's done Saudi before. It's not a problem. They take the money. They know that the money's there these days. So that is my instinct.
If he loses the rematch...
Oh, stop it, Rob.
What next for Anthony Joshua? If he boxes him in February, goes out to Saudi, loses another decision...
If he loses the rematch... like
what would it be, 31, 32?
Yeah,
he's 31 now, isn't he, Joshua?
As Dex said, and he's absolutely right. There's you can't not take the rematch now. That's where he is, and that's really where he's been almost since he beat Charles Martin.
Yeah.
He's been in that. You got through that bottleneck, and you can't come back down through it. It's you're there then. So he's going to have to take that rematch. But you know, I was talking to Matt Macklin about this on the way out last night, and he was saying to me, look, if I was really close to Joshua, if I was his brother, say, I'd wait till the dust settled. I would sit him down and I would say to him, listen, look at what you've done. It's absolutely sensational. But we don't need this rematch.
That's what I was going to say. Does he need somebody to pull him and say, look...
But it doesn't matter who says it, Rob. He's still going to do it because that's what they do as fighters, isn't it? That is what they do.
No, I agree, yeah.
But if he loses a rematch against Usyk, then he should retire.
Wait,
I think.
It depends how he loses.
Yeah.
I mean, if he gets stopped, then yeah, I'm with you. If it's a competitive fight.
Yeah, no, fair. It does. It does. It
think-
depends.
I don't
It
think
does. The manner of the defeat would be important. And I'm not completely ruling him out in the rematch, but on the evidence of last night, you know, this is heavyweight boxing, anything can happen, and blah blah. But on the evidence of last night, I just don't see it. But I think you're right. I think if he loses the rematch, I still don't think he will, because almost every fighter finishes on a defeat, but it's usually 2, maybe 3 in a row before you really get the message that that's it, and that's how they have to be, isn't it? That's their kind of tragic flaw. They always end up going on maybe a little bit too long because they need to absolutely know, is it really over? And it's like I feel
Well, if he loses the
cruel
rematch, that'll
kind
be-
of talking about him in these terms when you look at what he's done and what he's given, but were he to lose that rematch in similar fashion to how it went last night, then it's not like there wouldn't be fights out there for
No,
him.
there's
It's not
always
like he
someone there.
all of a sudden becomes a bad fighter, but what would the point of
What's the want?
But that's
going
what I
on?
mean about him having no power anymore. And you go from, it's a bit like with Saunders when he lost to Canelo. Eddie made a point that you get this big money and you have a fight against Canelo in that sort of magnitude. Once you lose, you're right down a few steps again. And then how would you get yourself up for that? And why would you even bother? And Joshua would get in that position. I feel that his fights, because it's Anthony Joshua, even if he loses the rematch, it's still going to be a colossal show and it's still going to be a big build-up and everything else. He's not going to slot on an undercard. He's not going to have a 10-rounder. But I feel like he's going to go on. I think he'd go on till he's 35, 36, even no matter what happens. And this is why, he'll probably end up boxing Fury one day. It'll be a different fight, but it will happen one day, I'm sure of it.
I think there's probably, outside of Usyk, obviously, I agree. I think we do see the rematch.
He
But
still needs the Whyte rematch.
exactly.
He's
I think
desperate
there's three names there that I think we still see him box. I think we still see the Fury fight at some point. I really do think that at some point we still see that. I think we see the Dillian Whyte rematch at some point, and I think we see the Andy Ruiz rubber match.
Nah,
You don't think so?
surely not. You reckon?
I think we see the Andy Ruiz rubber match at some point.
Well, do you know what? It would be a good. It's one that, say he loses to Usyk, they need to sell something.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
going to
you
be
could sell
reasonably
that.
cheap.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah,
sell
you
it.
could
And it's
But,
1-1. You could do it on Cinco de
There's
Mayo or
also
something like
Joe
that.
Joyce. There's also Daniel Dubois. There's these guys that you could market. It doesn't matter how many times Joshua lost, really. It doesn't. And that's why I feel like he would go on. It's not like there'd be nothing for him.
Problem
And
is,
also-
though, if you're right, it could go on, but then it all changes, doesn't it? I mean, it's not stadium fights anymore. It's arenas. You can't. The names you just mentioned there potentially. Daniel Dubois, I know we're talking years to go. Joe Joyce, those aren't stadium fights for AJ anymore because, look, if we just for the hardcores, we don't fill stadiums. We barely fill arenas. Hardcore fans, you need the casuals on board.
with that-
the
with that
casuals aren't jumping on board Joe Joyce. They're not.
But we were saying, people said that about Usyk, and I know COVID helped to get people in. They're just desperate to be in a stadium. I feel like might not sell a stadium fully, but you'd probably get 40,000 still. And
Might
then
go
that
to a different stadium.
Then that
different
justifies
size
it.
stadium. You could-
Exactly. Go to there's plenty. I feel like he is like still
Vicarage
will,
Road?
will always be the attraction that take. But even he did always talk about that. Maybe he'll finally fight Chisora at Vicarage Road.
There we go. Like there's I do think there is potential for him, and also like we mentioned about like the manner in which if he does lose the Usyk rematch, it's not often that you see a fighter who has got more to give, who's like 32, 33, leave on a decision loss. It's often when they get chinned. It's often when they get knocked out, and then he
There
doesn't
needs to be
have
a full stop, doesn't it?
yeah,
Generally,
yeah, and my eye went, or I wasn't right, or something to cling on to. No, you got ironed out in 3 rounds or 4 rounds or something like that. It's a conclusive ending.
Yeah, and that sort of, like I said before, tragically, almost that is what happens. That's
Yeah.
what it takes, isn't
Yeah.
it? I'd love to see him fight in Nigeria.
Yeah,
He says he
they could
wants
do the
to-
Joe Joyce fight there.
I'd love to see that.
Could do the Joe Joyce fight there.
I know
Both
there's a real will there to make it happen, and they're really looking at it at the moment, and they're looking to do
I'd love to see the
things to
Usyk
really
rematch there.
prove it.
No, it sounds crazy, but almost in the way in which Ali, I know it's a silly story, but Ali was a big underdog in Foreman in Africa, and it kind of came behind him and it galvanized him. I think that's where it really should be, if we can. But it's just the money, isn't it? Obviously, in Africa, where the Saudi money is just going to be so
there.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those sort of not exhibition-y fights, but those sorts of novelty places. It doesn't matter how many times he's lost. It doesn't matter what the run is, what belts are on the line. They ain't going to care. at all.
No.
So that's why I just see him going. I don't see it being a point where this is make or break. I really don't. But I do think that, like Rob McCracken, for instance, might look at the rematch and be like, we don't need this. But I don't feel like he would be able to prevent it from happening.
I don't think anybody
Is that
can
a
stop
problem
it
then?
happening.
Is that a problem?
I think it is slightly, but the same thing happened. I remember McCracken did not like the George Groves fight for Froch in the first place, and people thought it was, Eddie Hearn had spoken like a year before saying it was medically unsafe for George Groves and stuff like that. McCracken knew it was going to be a tough night. He knows this stuff. I'm sure he knew that Usyk fight was not great for him, like at all. And now he'll know even more. and he's the one now tasked with trying to turn it around. But I don't think he can prevent it from happening. I don't think anyone could dissuade Anthony Joshua from that happening.
No, I totally agree, and I think the one person who would probably try harder than anybody else would be Rob,
Yeah.
because I don't claim to know him particularly well, but the vibe I get off him is that he's a good bloke and he really cares about him.
Yeah.
And it's probably never really been about the money for him. Rob, training AJ, although I'm sure he's done tidily out of it. But I just don't see how anyone would be able to persuade him otherwise. He's going to take that fight. There's no possible other outcome, is there?